Job. The book of Job is one of the most intriguing and profound texts in the Bible, challenging the mind and spirit with questions that have intrigued humanity for millennia. In this book, human suffering is explored in a unique way, leading the reader to reflect on the reason behind trials and to seek the purpose that may exist in the midst of pain. The narrative is powerful in its simplicity and depth, centered on the figure of Job, a just man, honest and faithful to God, who suddenly finds himself facing unimaginable and seemingly inexplicable suffering. The story of Job challenges a central question that we all face. Why do good and just people suffer? Suffering often seems arbitrary and unjust, especially when it affects those who are faithful and seek to live according to divine precepts. This dilemma reveals the enigma of human suffering, something that goes beyond superficial explanations and leads us to a direct confrontation with the mysteries of life and faith. In Job's case, his pain is intensified by the lack of clear answers. He is faithful but still sees his life devastated without explanation. For contemporary readers, the book of Job is particularly relevant, as it speaks to all who face difficulties and seek to understand the meaning of adversity. We live in a world marked by uncertainty, where pain can arise unexpectedly, whether through loss, illness, or existential crisis. Faced with these situations, many ask themselves, is there a purpose in suffering? How can we persevere when the answers seem absent? The book of Job does not offer easy answers. On the contrary, it invites us to embrace the complexity of life, to accept that suffering can be part of the human process, and to reflect on the role of faith in moments of darkness. What makes this narrative unique is the way in which Job maintains his faith, even when all external signs seem to indicate abandonment. It teaches us that, although we may not always understand the purpose of our suffering, there is strength in persevering in trust, even without all the answers. For those seeking meaning in the face of trials, Job's example is a call to resilience and a search for deeper understanding. His suffering and faith remind us that often the answers to life's most difficult questions do not come in the form of logical explanations, but in a faith that remains steadfast despite the storms. Job, the protagonist of the book that bears his name, is presented as a just, upright, and deeply God-fearing man. He is described as an example of righteousness and virtue, someone who lives his faith with sincerity and always seeks to do good. In a society marked by the valorization of material blessings and the belief in divine retribution, Job seems to be the portrait of someone rewarded for his faithfulness. He is extremely blessed, possessing great wealth, a large family, and enviable health. His life is peaceful and full, a reflection of his impeccable character. However, in an unexpected moment, this situation of abundance and stability is drastically turned upside down. In a devastating sequence of events, Job loses everything he owned. First, his wealth, his flocks, servants, and all his possessions, is destroyed or taken away, leaving him with nothing that once made him a prosperous man. Then, an even more painful tragedy occurs. His children, his descendants, and his inheritance are tragically killed in an accident. As if that were not enough, Job is then struck in his own flesh, being struck down by a painful and disfiguring disease that leaves him physically weakened and despised by those who once admired him. The depth of Job's suffering is incomprehensible and unimaginable to most. He loses everything that could have had value in his life, both material and emotional, and his pain reaches a level of intense physical and psychological testing. What makes his story even more complex is the fact that he does not know why he is suffering. There was no specific sin, no moral failing that could explain these losses. On the contrary, his pain is all the more difficult to bear because he has always remained faithful to God and his principles. Despite this immeasurable suffering and lack of explanation, Job refuses to abandon his faith. He does not understand the reason for his pain, but he persists in his relationship with God, questioning and lamenting, but never completely renouncing his trust in the Creator. This behavior of Job reveals a faith that does not depend on external circumstances, a trust that remains firm even when everything around him falls apart. Job's ordeal is a powerful example of resilience and faith in the midst of desolation. Even under the weight of irreparable loss and unbearable physical pain, he maintains his integrity and does not give in to the pressure to curse God, as suggested by his wife, or to surrender to the simplistic explanations of his friends. He keeps himself. Job remains steadfast, even in the midst of lament and questioning. And his story leads us to reflect on the depth of faith that does not demand answers, but perseveres, even in the darkest of scenarios. Job's story deepens the concept of human suffering, revealing it as a trial that transcends understanding and defies simple explanations. When faced with such a severe and sudden loss, Job is forced to deal with the complexity of accepting his suffering without any evident justification. He finds himself stripped of everything that gave meaning to his life: his family, his health, and his possessions. And in addition, he is enveloped in a tormenting uncertainty about the reason for so much pain. What Job faces is not only physical or emotional pain, but also the agony of not understanding the purpose of his suffering. The narrative of the book does not limit suffering to a punitive perspective. Instead, Job questions whether his pain can be a test, a trial permitted by God without a clear explanation. His friends, however, interpret it differently. In their view, the suffering must be divine punishment for some hidden sin. On several occasions, his friends insist that he must have committed some error or transgression that would justify such retribution. This view reflects a common belief of the time, according to which prosperity was seen as a reward for righteousness, while suffering was seen as a sign of guilt or moral failure. This rigid logic, however, is challenged by the very existence of Job, a righteous man who suffers without any apparent guilt. This tension between the simplistic explanations of his friends and Job's direct experience of suffering leads him to deep reflections. He begins to question whether there really is a comprehensible cosmic justice, or whether God's ways are so lofty that they escape our comprehension. Job ponders the possibility of a divine reality that surpasses human notions of justice and logic. But this acceptance is not immediate. He goes through different emotional phases, from indignation and lamentation to despair and spiritual exhaustion. His reluctance to accept his friend's advice reveals a deeply human and instinctive side, which is not satisfied with easy answers for something as intricate as human suffering. These questions Job asks and his reactions bring to light the fragility and strength that coexist in human beings. At many times, he expresses his pain without reservation, lamenting his own existence and yearning for divine understanding. Job is faithful, but also human, and his need to find a reason for his suffering reveals the universal search for meaning in the midst of adversity. He refuses to believe that his suffering is the result of an unjust punishment or a divine miscalculation. On the contrary, he believes that there is something deeper at play, something that he cannot yet understand. From this confrontation with the incomprehensibility of suffering, Job shows us that accepting pain can be a path to spiritual maturity. He recognizes, at great cost, that true faith can be shaped by the acceptance of mysteries and by trust in a higher justice, which transcends human logic. Thus, Job's suffering becomes an invitation to reflection for all those who seek answers in the midst of pain, pointing to the possibility of a greater reality, in which purpose can exist even when our limited minds cannot see it. At the most intense point of his anguish, Job is surprised by God's direct intervention. After all his questions and laments, God finally responds, but in a way that goes beyond Job's expectations and ours as well. Instead of offering detailed explanations for suffering, God leads him to contemplate the grandeur of creation. He speaks to Job from a whirlwind, inviting him to reflect on the vastness of the universe and the complexity of the divine order, from the emergence of the stars to the life of wild animals, phenomena that Job could not fully understand. In this speech, God does not objectively answer Job's question about the reason for his pain, but by exposing the magnitude of creation, expands Job's understanding. showing him that there is a superior wisdom far beyond human logic. This dialogue is fundamental to Job's journey. The message that God conveys is not in words of comfort or detailed explanations, but in the display of a greatness that invites Job to humility and the recognition of his own limitations. Faced with the vastness and complexity of everything that God governs, Job is led to understand that, however difficult it may be, he needs to accept that some things will not be revealed to him. This acceptance, however, is not synonymous with passive resignation, but with active trust in a purpose that, although incomprehensible, is in the hands of a just and wise Creator. The experience takes Job to a new level of faith, where he learns to trust without the need for clear answers. He realizes that his relationship with God cannot be based on an exchange of faithfulness for protection, but on unconditional trust. Job's faith is now stripped of expectations and trade-offs. It becomes a belief that persists, even when he is enveloped by the darkness of the unknown. Job's story teaches us that true faith does not demand explanations or rewards. It is a trust that holds firm despite the absence of answers and the weight of suffering. This teaching challenges the common idea that faith protects us from all pain and suffering. Instead, God shows Job that the purpose of faith is to enable us to navigate these moments with deep trust, even without guarantee of understanding. God's wisdom revealed to Job is that suffering is often a mystery, but that our trust in God should not be shaken by this. True faith is, therefore, a covenant that holds even in the absence of answers, a trust that chooses to remain, even when the divine purpose remains hidden. In the end, Job does not receive an explanation for every loss, but he finds something even greater, an expanded vision of who God is and the vast mystery of creation. This revelation frees him from a conditioned faith, transforming it into genuine trust. Job recognizes that his place is one of humility before immeasurable wisdom, and that, even without all the answers, he can live with confidence in God. Job's story challenges us to cultivate this faith that persists in the darkness, that stands firm in the silence, and that understands that not all questions will find answers, but that, nevertheless, trusts in the purpose of a God who knows everything. After recognizing his limitations in the face of God's mysteries and humbly submitting to divine greatness, Job experiences an extraordinary turning point in his story. At the end of the book, he is restored, and everything he had lost, wealth, family, and health, is returned double. This restoration, however, is not just a material reward. It carries profound symbolism that speaks to the spiritual renewal and growth that his faith has undergone throughout his ordeal. God not only restores to Job what he had, but also transforms his understanding and his relationship with the divine. Job's journey is marked by an inner transformation that is not immediately visible, but which is reflected in his new vision of life and God. After accepting his own limitations and the mystery of suffering, Job reaches a spiritual depth that he did not previously possess. His faith, previously linked to well-being and protection, is now more resilient and independent of circumstances. He understands that true faith does not depend on guarantees, but is a genuine trust in God, which persists even in pain and silence. This final restoration symbolizes not only a return to the previous state, but the renewal of a man who, after having been deeply tested, emerges strengthened and with a more comprehensive and mature understanding. What Job receives at the end of his trial is much more than riches and material blessings. His spiritual renewal is a testament to the power of transformation that can arise in the midst of difficulties. Job now carries a faith that is not shaken by circumstances and that does not require explanations. He came to understand that his relationship with God goes beyond exchanges, and that, by trusting without conditions, he achieves an inner peace that was previously unknown to him. This new perspective of Job symbolizes a growth that could only have been achieved through the experience of suffering, revealing the possibility of a spiritual rebirth in the midst of the worst crises. The story of Job's restoration is, therefore, an invitation to reflect on how pain can serve as an instrument of maturing faith. Job shows that, by facing our trials with perseverance and humility, we can come out the other side transformed, not only comforted, but renewed in our spiritual understanding. The return of material blessings to Job does not mean that he was rewarded for his patience, but rather that he was invited to a new phase of his life, where his faith no longer depends on possessions or circumstances. Suffering, which previously seemed devoid of purpose, now reveals itself as the path that led him to unshakable faith and a more intimate understanding of God's power and wisdom. Job emerges from his ordeal not only with more possessions, but with a renewed soul that knows how to trust God even when the answers remain hidden. He shows that true faith, the kind that endures, is shaped by the fire of hardship, and that this faith is capable of leading us to a life where blessings are seen as a divine gift, not as a right or a reward. In the end, Job's restoration is a celebration of the spiritual strength he has developed, a proof that even in the face of pain, there is a path to renewal and inner peace that transcends loss and is sustained by trust in God's purpose. The book of Job, with its deeply human and spiritual narrative, offers a timeless reflection on suffering and faith. For contemporary readers, Job's story carries a powerful message. Suffering, though incomprehensible and painful, can be a transformative force. Job not only survives pain, but grows spiritually from it. His experience teaches us that suffering is not an obstacle to faith, but a path to a deeper understanding of life and God. In today's world, when we face difficulties and adversities, whether personal, family, or collective, Job's example shows us that suffering does not need to be seen as a punishment or a loss of purpose. On the contrary, it can be an opportunity for growth, renewal, and learning. In the process of suffering, Job not only questions, but also comes to a deeper understanding of his own faith. He recognizes that God is greater than simple explanations, and that his trust in God can exist regardless of circumstances. This is a fundamental lesson. True faith is not based on a trade-off, where we receive protection or benefits in exchange for our devotion, but on a deep trust in God that persists even in the face of pain, loss, and mystery. This lesson is extremely relevant to the modern world, where we often seek immediate answers to our difficulties. We are quick to seek explanations for suffering, whether rational or spiritual, but the book of Job teaches us that there are times when answers will not come. This does not mean that pain is useless, but that it can lead us to a greater understanding of life and ourselves. Job's suffering challenges us to reflect on our own lives. How can we use hardship as an opportunity to strengthen our faith and grow spiritually? How can we, even in pain, trust in a greater purpose, even if it is not immediately revealed? The story of Job invites us to embrace resilience, the ability to keep going even when there are no clear answers or explanations for what we are experiencing. Resilience is not simply about enduring pain, but about choosing to trust, grow, and learn from it. Job shows us that as we allow suffering to shape us, we can emerge from it with a stronger, deeper, and more confident faith. His story teaches us that true faith is not about understanding everything, but about trusting in the divine mystery and purpose that lies beyond our understanding. In our own journey, we can choose resilience as a way to respond to suffering. We can trust God, even when the answers are unclear, knowing that He is with us in our trials. Resilience is not about not feeling the pain or not questioning it, but about persisting in faith, even when the path seems dark. Job ultimately shows us that true victory is not in escaping pain, but in emerging from it transformed, with a stronger faith and a deeper understanding of what it means to trust in a God who is above all and who guides us, even in the most difficult moments. Therefore, as we reflect on suffering in our own lives, we must remember that it can be an opportunity for spiritual growth. Resilience and trust in God, even without the answers we seek, are the key to weathering life's storms with renewed faith. In moments of darkness, we can, like Job, find the light of confidence, knowing that, despite everything, we are being guided by a greater purpose. May our faith be, like Job's, a faith that persists in adversity, a faith that does not demand answers, but that trusts fully in the God who knows what is best for us, even when we cannot see the path ahead. So, as we have seen, suffering is not the end, but an opportunity to strengthen our faith and understand the depth of God's purpose. The story of Job teaches us that even in the midst of the greatest adversity, our trust in God can lead us to transformative spiritual growth. If you enjoyed this content and want to learn more about how faith can guide us through life's difficulties, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Click the subscribe button now and turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos. Together, we can continue exploring these themes that can truly change the way we live. See you in the next video.